Abner Tullis had 91 steps from the door of the section house to the switch stand at the east end of Amberley Cut, and on the morning of the 14th of August, he counted every one of them out loud because he could no longer see it. He could see the shape of it. What he could not see anymore was the target, the little painted plate on top that told a man at a glance whether the points were thrown for the main line or for the siding. So he counted 91 steps, then reach out, and his hand would find the lever exactly where his hand had always found it. The morning freight was 40 minutes out of Kinnery. He got the points over. He walked back along the rail with his hand trailing on the top of it, and when the freight came through the cut, it came through on the main, and it did not slow down, and nobody on it looked at him twice. Abner Tullis had been the switchman at Amberley Cut since 1844. He had a house because of that switch. He had a stove and a bunk and $11 a month, and every part of it belonged to the railroad, and the railroad did not know that its switchman at Amberley Cut had been going blind for 2 years. The day they found out was the day he stopped having anywhere to go. Hesper Loy got off the westbound at Kinnery on the 16th of August with one bag. She was 26. She asked at the hotel and at the freight house, and by the second afternoon, she had run out of places in Kinnery to ask, which does not take long. Nobody would say why. That is the thing about a town that size. They say we're not hiring just now, and they say it kindly, and you understand that some piece of information about you has already gotten around the whole of it faster than you walked, and you will never learn which piece, and it will not matter. She walked out the grade to Amberley Cut on the 18th because it was the only thing left that was not back the way she had come. She found an old man on a platform holding a coffee tin, and she watched him for a while before he knew she was there. She watched him reach for the rail with his hand out in front of him at the height where the rail was. He heard her boots on the cinders, and he turned toward the sound, and he looked at a place about 2 feet to the left of where she was standing. Then she said the thing that decided the winter. She said, "You need a pair of eyes. I need a roof." Abner Tullis did not answer for a long moment. He had spent 2 years building a very careful house of habits to keep exactly this from happening, and it had taken a stranger who had been on his platform less than a minute. She said, "Nobody has to know about the rest of it." He asked her what the rest of it was. She said, "That's the part nobody has to know." He stood there with the sun on the side of his face where he could still feel it, and he did the arithmetic that a man does at 71 when he has one thing left and somebody has just put a hand on it. He said, "There's a cot in the storeroom." Emmett Prine carried a letter in his coat pocket from the 3rd of February until the 6th of March. It had Abner Tullis's name on it, and it was signed, and it was ready. He never served it. He put it back in his pocket in front of his own crew, and he rode down the grade. And what he said before he went, he would have paid a year's wages not to have to say. Amberley Cut was 160 yards of rock and a reputation. The grade came up out of the sage, and then the mountain got in the way, and rather than go around it, the company had gone through it, and what they had left behind was a slot. 2 walls of blasted rock standing 30 feet high on either side of a single track, running almost exactly east and west. In January, it was a box with the lid off, and the wind came down the pass out of the northwest and hit that slot broadside, and everything the wind was carrying went into it and stopped. Snow does not blow past a hole in the ground, it falls in. The cut had filled in 1879, and it had filled in 81, and it had filled in 83, and each time it filled, the company sent men up from Kinnery with shovels and they dug it out by hand. In 83, it took 9 days. There had been a passenger train stopped on the east side of the fill for 6 of those days. Nobody died on it. 2 people came off it who never got right afterward, and one of them was a child. Emmett Prine had signed the report on 83. That is the thing to understand about Prine, and it is the reason none of what he did that autumn was cruelty. He was the roadmaster. He was 44 years old, and he had a good position, and he was the man whose name went on the bottom of the page after every winter, in his own handwriting, explaining to the division why the line had been closed. He had written that page 3 times. He was not going to write it a fourth time, and he had come to a decision about Amberley Cut in the spring of '84, which was perfectly sound and which he was not going to be argued out of. The decision was that the cut needed a young man in it. He never said the word blind. He may not have known it as a fact. What he knew was that Abner Tullis was 71 years old and that the cut had filled 3 times in 5 years, and Prine had put those two things next to each other in his mind the way a tired man does, and he had gotten an answer that satisfied him. So he had been out to Amberley Cut twice already that summer, and he had stood on the platform looking at the old man a beat longer than was comfortable, and Abner had passed both times because he had spent 2 years learning how. The thing was going to end in the winter. Everybody involved knew it without saying it. If the cut filled again, Prine would have his page to write, and this time he would have a name to put in it, and the name would be Tullis, and the old man would be off that platform inside a week with a bag in his hand and 71 years behind him, and nowhere on earth to carry them. That was the clock. It was not the snow. The snow was only the hand on it. Hesper Loy understood the whole of it by the end of her first week, and nobody told her any of it. She understood it because she had been reading rooms like that her entire life, which is a skill you do not acquire on purpose, and which was very probably the piece of information that had gotten around Kinnery ahead of her. The chaff was in the grain shed at Kinnery, and it was garbage. Every fall the company took delivery of oats, and the bottom of every sack was hulls and dust and broken straw. And when the sacks were emptied, the chaff got swept into the corner and burned. Hesper Loy asked the grain clerk if she could have some, and the clerk asked her what for, and she said for a mattress, and he gave her 2 flour sacks of it. She was not making a mattress. It was the 22nd of August, and there was no snow within 400 miles, and the temperature at 2 in the afternoon was 91 degrees. She had gotten hold of one idea, which had come to her not from a book, but from a granary floor in a place she did not talk about, where she had spent a winter sweeping and where she had noticed that the chaff never lay evenly. It piled. It piled behind the doorpost, in the same places every time, and the wind that came through that granary door was not doing anything clever. It was just slowing down when it met something, and everything it was carrying was falling out of it at the place where it slowed. Snow blowing across open ground moves like a river of grains rather than like a cloud. The grains creep and hop along the ground, and the only thing holding them up at all is the speed of the wind. Take the speed away, and they pile up right there. Chaff is snow that will hold still and let you look at it. So she stood on the west lip of Amberley Cut with a flour sack under her arm and threw handfuls of oat hulls into the wind. And she told Abner where they went. That was the part that mattered, and it was not planned. She threw the first handful and started to say something about it, and then realized he was standing there with his face turned toward the sound of it and had seen nothing at all. And so she told him. She said the chaff had gone out about 30 feet and then dropped all at once in a line. She said it was thick where the ground stepped down. She said it had not gone into the cut. It had come down before the cut, and then the rest of it had gone over. Abner Tullis said, "Throw it again from the big rock." She threw it from the big rock, and he said, "Now from the section house corner. Now from the crossing, now from the flat where the tie pile is." She threw chaff for 2 hours in the heat while a blind man stood beside her with his head cocked and asked for one more, and one more, and one more. And then he told her where the snow had drifted in 1879. He told her where it had drifted in 81 and where it had drifted in 83. He had 40 years of it. He had a map in his head that nobody had ever asked him for, because he was the switchman, and nobody asks the switchman anything. The chaff and the map agreed. Every place the chaff came down was a place the snow had come down. Every place the chaff went past was a place the snow had gone past. Abner did not say anything for a while after that. He had his hand on the rail. Then he said, 40 years I've been digging that cut out. 40 years, and it never once occurred to me to find out where it was coming from." He asked her whether the chaff would tell them where to stand a fence. She said she thought it might. She was wrong about almost everything else that autumn, and this was the only part she had right from the beginning, and it was still going to take her 3 failures and a buried train to find out what she had right. The fence she built in September was a good fence, and it was the worst thing that happened at Amberley Cut in 11 years, and she built it exactly the way any sensible person would have built it. She built it tight. She built it close. Both of those decisions came from the same place, because it is the place everybody starts from. If you want to stop something, you put a wall in front of it. You make the wall solid, because a wall with holes in it is not a wall. And you put the wall near the thing you are protecting, because that is what protecting means. She had the tie pile to work with. Condemned ties split and stood on end, and she had 6 weeks. She stood 140 feet of solid plank on the northwest lip of the cut, 20 paces back from the edge, and it was a handsome piece of work, and it stood the wind all through October. The first storm of the year came on the 9th of November. It was not much of a storm. It blew about 9 hours and dropped maybe 5 inches on the flat. Amberley Cut filled to the top of the rail. The eastbound local came up the grade the next morning and put its pilot into a drift 11 feet deep and sat there, and it took 22 men from Kinnery 2 days to open the line, and Emmett Prine came up on the second day and stood on the lip of the cut in his good coat and looked down at the men and the shovels and the buried train, and then he turned around and looked at the fence, 20 paces upwind, solid plank, 140 feet of it, and behind it, in its lee, a drift shaped like a wave that had run out of the fence and spilled straight down over the edge and into the cut and filled it, a drift that would not have been there in that shape, in that place, if the fence had not been there to make it. She had built a machine for putting snow in the cut. A fence slows the wind. Where the wind slows, everything the wind is carrying comes out of it. All of it in one long heap downwind of the boards. That is the whole of what a fence does, which is why the fence chooses where the drift goes. Put it far away, and it puts the drift far away. Put it 20 paces upwind of the thing you love, and it will lay the drift straight into it, with the whole weight of the storm behind it. She had not protected the cut. She had aimed at it. Prine did not shout either. There is a kind of man who does not have to. He stood on the lip until she came up out of the cut with a shovel, and then he said, loud enough for the men below to hear him and no louder, that he had been the roadmaster of that division for 9 years, and he had never before seen anybody make the line worse on purpose. Then he said, "Whose is she, Tullis?" Not who, whose. Abner said she worked for him. Prine said, "With what?" And that was the whole of it, said in front of 22 men with shovels, and it went back to Kinnery on the work train that evening, and it was in the store by dark. The switchman at Amberley is keeping a woman nobody knows, out of $11 a month, and she has just buried the eastbound. Hesper Loy stood in the cut that night after the men had gone, in the dark, with her hand flat on the drift she had made. She did not take the fence down. She went and got the chaff. There was a drift in the cut now, which meant that for the first time she had something better than chaff. She had the real thing, lying where it had fallen, holding still. She spent the 11th of November walking it with a lath. She pushed the lath down through the drift every 10 paces and read the depth off it and called the number out, and Abner stood up on the lip where he could hear her and kept the numbers. He could not write them. He kept them the way he had kept the whole map for 40 years, in his head, and when she was done, he gave them all back to her in order without missing one. The shape came out of the numbers. The drift did not start at the fence. It started about 30 feet behind the fence, and it built, and it reached its deepest a good long way downwind, and then it tailed off, and the tail of it was still going when it went over the edge into the cut. The drift was longer than she had ever imagined a drift could be. That was the whole discovery. She had thought of a fence as a thing that made a pile. It did not make a pile. It made a very long, very low ramp of snow that went on downwind, and Amberley Cut had been sitting in the middle of that ramp. Abner said, "How far?" She paced it. It went out past the tie pile. From the fence to the far end of that drift was more than 100 paces, and the fence was 6 feet high. Neither of them had a word for that. There is a number for it now. Nobody would work it out for another 90 years. When they finally did, it came out that a fence throws its drift a very long way downwind, many times its own height, every time, always. Abner and Hesper did not have the number. They had a lath and a blind man's memory and 100 paces of stepped-off snow. What they got out of that was the same answer the number would have given them. It was nowhere near far enough away. So in the last week of November, they took the whole fence down and moved it back 140 paces, out onto the flat past the tie pile, and she rebuilt it tight plank and 6 feet exactly as it had been, because the distance was the thing that had been wrong, and she had fixed the thing that had been wrong. That was the second failure, and it was the one that had a price on it. The storm came on the 2nd of December. The drift formed at the new fence, a hard little ridge, steep and short and much too small, and the rest of the snow came over the top of it without slowing and went on into the east end of Amberley Cut and lay 2 feet deep. 2 feet is nothing. In November, it had been 11, and 22 men had come up from Kinnery, and the line had been closed the whole time they dug. 2 feet does not close a line. 2 feet means the freight comes through on time at 6:10, and the switchman goes out alone in the dark at 1:45 and throws the points for it. The east end of Amberley Cut was where the switch stand was. Abner Tullis went out at 5:45 on the 3rd of December and counted. The snow was over his boot tops by the 40th step. Snow takes the length out of a stride, and it takes it a little at a time, and a man does not feel that happening. He sees it. Abner had not seen anything in 2 years. He got to 91 and put his hand out and closed it on air. He went back to the door and counted it again, and there was nothing there the second time either. Abner Tullis got down on his knees on his own section and went along the ground with his hands, hunting for a lever he had thrown 20,000 times, with the freight coming up the grade out of Kinnery in the dark. Hesper found him. She put his hand on it. He threw the points with 3 minutes in hand, and neither of them ever said one word about it after. Ansel Dake was on the work train behind the freight and saw an old man on his knees in the snow 40 feet from his own switch stand. Abner told him he had dropped a wrench. Dake carried it back to Kinnery as a story about her, and that was the only thing that saved him. For 40 years, the wind had come over the top of the west wall and scoured that east ground bare, and Abner had built his map on ground the wind kept clean for him. A fence moves snow. That is the entirety of what a fence does. Move the fence and you move the snow, and every place it lies afterward is a place his map has never been. In November, she had buried a train. In December, she had taken the map out of a blind man's head. It was Abner, 2 mornings later, who asked her whether she had ever noticed how the wind came through a stand of willow. She said she had not. He said, "It doesn't. It comes through, but it doesn't come out the other side. Whereas your fence is a wall, and wind does what water does at a wall. It goes over." So she pulled boards until the chaff came down where she wanted it, 1 board in 3, after 9 days of pulling too many and putting them back. And the town of Kinnery decided she had lost her mind, and in January, she took the fence to 9 feet with a second rank of ties lashed on the first. Then the wind changed and made all of it worthless in a night. The storm on the 11th of January came down the pass instead of across it, off the north instead of the northwest, and it hit Amberley Cut at an angle her fence was not standing across. The fence was square to the track. It had never once occurred to her to build it square to anything else. The cut filled again. Not badly. Enough. Abner was on the platform when it started, and he told her before it filled. He said, "This one's off the north." She asked him how he could possibly know that. He said the north wind came in over the top of the west wall instead of straight down the slot, and it made a noise on the rock like somebody drawing a bow across it, and he had been listening to that noise for 40 years and had never in his life had any reason to mention it to anybody. Then he said, "You built it across the rail. Build it across the wind. The wind doesn't care where the company put the rail." She built the 3rd fence in the last week of January, and she built 2 of them at 2 angles because there were 2 winds. And when she stood the 2nd one, she left a hand's width of daylight under the bottom rail, because the November fence had had its feet in the dirt and had buried itself in one night. She did not know why that worked. She knew that it worked. Emmett Prine came out on the 3rd of February with a letter in his pocket. What he found was 2 ragged fences at contrary angles 140 paces out on an empty flat, 9 feet tall, every 3rd board missing, daylight under the bottom. He looked at it a long time. Then he said, "To Abner, not to her. I'll have your house in the spring, and I'll have it because you let this happen on your section, and I want you to understand that I take no pleasure in it whatsoever." And that was true. He took none. Abner Tullis was nearly finished on the 19th of February, and it had nothing to do with snow. The company sent a form out that winter. It was 1 sheet, and it asked 11 questions about the condition of the section, and it had to be filled in by hand by the man in charge and given to the roadmaster in person. Abner had been getting around the paper for 2 years. There was not much of it. What there was, he had been doing at the kitchen table at night with a lamp turned all the way up and his face about 9 inches from the page, and by that February he was writing over the top of his own words without knowing it. He could not have a woman fill it in. The hand would be wrong, and Prine had seen his hand for 9 years. So Hesper read the questions aloud, and Abner said the answers, and then she put his finger on the line and he wrote them himself, 1 word at a time, with her thumbnail marking where the next word started, and it took them from after supper until nearly 1 in the morning, and when it was done, it looked like the hand of a 71-year-old man and not like the hand of a blind one. He gave it to Prine on the platform on the 20th. Prine read it standing there. Then he looked up at Abner, and he held the sheet out sideways, off to Abner's left, and he said, "You dropped your pencil." Abner did not look at the sheet. He said, "No, I didn't. It's in my pocket." Prine put the paper in his coat, and neither of them ever mentioned it again, and Hesper Loy stood inside the door where she had been listening and had to put her hand on the frame. It began on the 24th, in the middle of the morning. It came out of the northwest, which was the wind the long fence was built across. It started at about 11 in the morning, and by 2, you could not see the tie pile from the platform, and it blew for 3 days, and it is still in the division records as the worst thing that ever happened on that line. 61 miles of track went under. A freight went into a drift at Sill Mile and stayed there 8 days, and the crew walked out. Emmett Prine spent every hour of it on a work train with 200 men and shovels, and every one of the places he dug out was a place where the company had done exactly what it had always done, which was to build a good tight snow fence close to the track where a sensible man would build it. He dug for 8 days, and on the 2nd day, a rider got through from the east end and told him something he made the man repeat twice. Amberley Cut was open, not partly open, not passable with care. Open, bare rail, ballast showing, the same as it had been in October, with the wind still blowing and the storm still going on, and 140 paces out on the flat, in the whiteout, 2 ragged 9-foot fences at contrary angles holding back a drift the size of a freight train, and an old man and a woman walking the length of the cut every 4 hours in the dark with a lantern, and nothing whatsoever for them to do. Prine did not come to Amberley Cut when he heard. He had 61 miles under snow and a division superintendent asking him questions by wire, and a man in his position does not ride 9 miles to look at the one place that is working. He came on the 6th of March when it was over. He came alone on the speeder, and he stopped it short of the cut and got off and walked the rest, and Hesper Loy saw him coming from the platform and went and got Abner. Prine walked the whole length of Amberley Cut first. Bare rail. Then he climbed the west lip and stood there and looked out at the flat. The drift lay behind the long fence like something that had been poured. It was 9 feet at the fence, and it ran downwind and downwind and downwind, thinning, going out across the flat in a long, shallow tongue. And it stopped. It simply ran out and stopped, a good 60 paces short of the lip he was standing on. Every ounce of that had been going into his cut for 40 years. He stood there a while. Then he came down and stood on the platform in front of the 2 of them, and he said it. he said. "I've dug that cutout 3 times with my name on the report, and I've had 200 men on shovels for 8 days at Silmile and Cobb and the Narrows, and every one of those was a place where I put the fence myself, and I put it where it made sense, and I was wrong at every single one of them, and this is the only piece of my division that stayed open, and I did not build it, and I would not have let you build it if you had asked me." Ansel Dake was on the speeder and heard all of it. That is how it got back to Kinnery, which is the only reason anybody there ever believed it. Then Prine took the letter out of his coat. He had been carrying it since February, and he did not tear it up because he was not that kind of man either. He put it back. He said, "I need to know how far out." And Hesper Loy told him the truth, which was that she did not know, that she had found it by throwing oat chaff into the wind in August and reading where it came down, and that the only rule she had was that it was always, always further out than a person would think. Prine turned around and looked at the flat again. He said, "Further than that?" She said, "Further than that. There is one more thing, and nobody wrote it down." Prine asked Abner Tullis a question. An ordinary question about the grade east of the cut, and while he asked it, he was looking out at the fence, and Abner answered it because he had been over that grade 10,000 times. And then Prine said, still looking at the flat, not turning around, "How long have you not been able to see, Abner?" And Abner Tullis, 71 years old, standing on the platform of the house he had lived in since 1844, with nowhere on this earth to go, said, 2 years in April. Prine nodded. He said, "Keep the switch keyed the way you keep it. I'll not put it in the book." Then he got on the speeder and went back down the grade to Kinnery, and he never said one word about it to anybody for the rest of his life. And the reason it is known at all is that Hesper Loy was standing 4 feet away. They put up 11 miles of it that summer. Prine sent crews out along the division with condemned ties and a set of instructions in his own handwriting, and the instructions did not say 35 times the height because nobody knew that. They said, "Further out than you think." Then further than that. Leave every third board off. Leave a hand's width under the bottom. Stand it across the wind and not across the rail, and go ask the man who has been there longest which way the wind actually comes, because he knows and you do not. That last line was in the instructions. Ansel Dake, who copied them out for the Kinnery crew, said so. The company did not adopt any of it. The men who wrote the standards were in Omaha, and they went on printing the old placement in the manuals, and there were engineers still getting it backward in textbooks in 1908, still laying the drift straight into the thing they meant to save. But the Kinnery division stayed open. Amberley Cut did not fill again in Abner Tullis's lifetime, and it did not fill in Emmett Prine's. Abner kept the switch for 6 more years and died in the section house in 1890 at the age of 77, in a house that belonged to the railroad and that the railroad never took back. He could not see anything at all by the end. He could still walk out to the switch stand and throw it, 91 steps, and put his hand exactly where the lever was, and he did it for the last time 11 days before he died. Hesper Loy stayed at Amberley Cut for 19 years. She never said where she came from. Nobody in Kinnery ever found out, and after that winter, nobody asked, and the town that had run out of places for her to ask in 2 afternoons in August came to be quietly proud of her in the way that towns do, which is by telling the story as though they had known all along. She kept a flour sack of oat chaff in the section house. She got a fresh one every fall from the grain shed at Kinnery, and the clerks who came after knew to keep it for her, and none of them ever knew why. When the company finally put a plow on that division in 1903, a young engineer came out to survey Amberley Cut, and he looked at the 2 old fences still standing out on the flat, and he asked the woman at the section house why anybody had ever built them way out there, so far from the track that they could not possibly protect it. She said, "Come here in January." For 40 years, Abner Tullis had gone out with a shovel every time the cut filled, and every one of those 40 years he had gone out to the same place, down into the slot, where the snow was. The snow was never in the cut. The snow was 140 paces away, out on an empty flat where nobody had any reason to look, and it had been on its way for a long time before it ever arrived.